The blue crayon trembles in 5-year-old Jay's hand as he draws a smiling woman beside a faceless man on paper, bearing his elite school's logo. The other children erupt in laughter when they see the simple dress and apron, but Jay only presses his lips together, writing slowly above her head, "My mom." That night, the hilltop mansion feels colder than ever, illuminated by chandeliers that don't reach the shadows, where security guards murmur in hushed tones. The woman from the drawing is kneeling on the marble floor, scrubbing a stain that doesn't exist, while two socialites watch with wine glasses, whispering loud enough on purpose. "Look at that, the boss's little boy prefers a black maid over his real mother. What a spoiled brat is he?" one of them spits out, her laughter cutting through the silence like a blade. The crumpled paper with the drawing falls from Jay's hands and slides to the polished shoes that just crossed the threshold of the hall. The sound of the heavy door closing echoes through the mansion, and everyone holds their breath as they recognize the slow, dangerous footsteps of the man nobody expected home this early, the Korean mafia boss, the boy's Faith. If you want to discover how this explosive confrontation began and what happened next, subscribe to the channel and leave us in the comments where you're watching from. Each view helps bring more stories like this. Now let's go back to where it all started. 2 years earlier, Aisha Washington stood at the corner of 5th Avenue and 34th Street at 5:47 a.m., staring up at what the city's underworld whispered about in equal parts fear and reverence, the Dragon Tower. The reimagined Empire State Building pierced the pre-dawn sky like a blade, its upper 40 floors gutted and reconstructed into a fortress that belonged to one man. Her worn palest sneakers, the soles starting to separate from the canvas, looked obscene against the polished black granite plaza where a fountain carved with intertwining Korean dragons burbled water that probably cost more per gallon than her weekly grocery budget. Aisha's reflection in the fountain's obsidian surface showed a woman who'd aged 5 years in the 3 since leaving Kingston. At 28, she should have been thriving, a certified pediatric nurse with steady work, maybe saving for her own place. Instead, her nursing credentials gathered dust in a manila folder. Because New York didn't recognize Jamaican certifications, her work visa had expired 14 months ago, when Marcus refused to marry her after all. And she was currently employed illegally at the Mandarin Oriental, using her cousin's social security number to scrub toilets for guests who didn't know her name. She clutched the canvas backpack containing 2 identical black uniform dresses her grandmother had sewn and sent in a care package last Christmas, a folder with her real credentials in case anyone cared to look, and exactly $73 in carefully folded bills. The employment agency, a dingy office in Queens that specialized in placing undocumented workers in the kinds of jobs citizens wouldn't touch, had been brutally clear. Kang Ji-Hoon paid triple the market rate, but demanded absolute obedience, total discretion, and didn't tolerate incompetence. The previous maid had been fired after his son was hospitalized with an asthma attack triggered by bleach fumes she'd used to clean the bathroom. "You're early. That's good." The voice came from behind her, and Aisha spun to find an older Korean woman, perhaps 65, with steel-gray hair pulled into an immaculate bun and wearing a modernized hanbok in deep navy silk. Her face was weathered but kind, her eyes sharp with the intelligence of someone who'd survived decades in a world that didn't forgive mistakes. "I am Mrs. Kim. I have managed Mr. Kang's household for 17 years. The agency said you have medical training." "Yes, ma'am. 3 years pediatric nursing at Kingston Public Hospital. I specialized in children with chronic respiratory conditions, allergies, developmental delays." Aisha's Jamaican accent thickened when she was nervous, the musical lilt of her English becoming more pronounced. "I know the file says I'm only qualified for cleaning, but I thought—" "What you thought doesn't matter." Mrs. Kim's tone wasn't cruel, just pragmatic. "What matters is that Jae-min needs someone who won't kill him with chemical cleaners, and who understands that a 5-year-old with severe asthma requires more than just swept floors. Follow me. Speak only when spoken to, and remember that everything you see and hear in this building is confidential. Do you understand what confidential means in Mr. Kang's world?" The weight of the question settled over Aisha like a shroud. She'd heard the whispers at the hotel, how certain guests arrived with bodyguards and briefcases of cash, how the penthouse suites were sometimes reserved for men whose names appeared in federal indictments. It means I see nothing, I hear nothing, and I survive by being invisible. Mrs. Kim's expression softened fractionally. You learn quickly. Come. They entered through a side entrance where security guards in tailored black suits and earpieces scanned Aisha with eyes that calculated threat levels in milliseconds. A metal detector, a bag search, a background check already completed that she hadn't known about. One guard murmured something in Korean into his radio, listened to the response, then nodded curtly. She's cleared. 15th floor service elevator only. The elevator was paneled in dark cherrywood, with dragon motifs carved so intricately that Aisha could see individual scales, whiskers, claws. It smelled of expensive leather and something else, gun oil maybe, or the particular cologne of violence. Mrs. Kim stood with her hands folded precisely at her waist, her silence heavy with unspoken rules. When the doors opened directly into the penthouse, Aisha forgot to breathe. The space sprawled before her like something from a film about people who'd never worried about money a single day in their lives. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around 3 walls, displaying Manhattan like a conquered kingdom. Central Park, a dark rectangle to the north. The Hudson River gleaming like molten silver to the west. The city's skyscrapers bowing before this tower that ruled them all. The floor wasn't tile, but solid slabs of Calcutta marble veined with gold, so polished that Aisha could see the reflection of the chandelier overhead, not crystal but carved jade, each piece backlit to glow like captured moonlight. The furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. A sofa in Italian leather so black it seemed to absorb light, chairs with frames of ebony inlaid with mother-of-pearl, a coffee table that was a single slab of glass balanced on bronze dragons. Everything was sharp angles and cold surfaces, beautiful and utterly devoid of warmth. The fireplace was carved from a single piece of jade, deep green shot through with white, and must have cost more than Aisha would earn in a lifetime. This is the main living area, Mrs. Kim explained, her voice barely above a whisper, as though the space demanded reverence. You will clean it daily using only natural products, white vinegar, baking soda, lemon juice mixed with water. Mr. Kang's son cannot tolerate synthetic chemicals. The previous staff nearly killed him. Do you understand the responsibility? Yes, ma'am. Aisha's voice came out steadier than she felt. Her hands, calloused from years of work, looked obscene against the perfection surrounding her. Dark skin against white marble, poverty against impossible wealth. They moved through rooms that seemed to multiply endlessly. A kitchen outfitted like a Michelin-starred restaurant, with appliances Aisha didn't recognize, counters of absolute black granite, knives displayed like art. A library with books in Korean and English, their leather bindings embossed with gold, titles she'd never be educated enough to understand. A gym with equipment overlooking the city, as if even exercise required a view of everything you'd conquered. Then they entered the child's bedroom, and Aisha's heart cracked. It was vast and cold and profoundly sad. The walls were painted dove grey, the furniture white lacquered wood that looked like it had never been touched by sticky fingers. Shelves lined with educational toys, still in their original packaging, robotics kits, language learning tablets, building sets designed for children 3 years older. The bed was king-sized with hospital corners on sheets that probably cost $300, far too big for a 5-year-old who must feel lost in all that empty space. Bars covered the window, clever bars disguised as decorative Korean lattice work, but bars nonetheless, overlooking Central Park's sprawling green. On a desk sat a single personal item, a framed photograph of a woman so beautiful she seemed to glow, Korean, perhaps 30, with long dark hair and a smile that radiated genuine joy as she cradled a newborn wrapped in blue. The baby's face was scrunched and red, brand new, and the woman looked at him like he'd hung the moon. Jay's mother, Mrs. Kim said quietly, following Aisha's gaze. Min Seo, she died 6 years ago in what the police called a car accident. What it really was, she stopped, choosing her words carefully. It was a message from rivals who thought they could hurt Mr. Kang by taking what he loved. They learned their mistake, slowly. Aisha shivered despite the climate-controlled air. And Jay? He was 3 months old when she died. He doesn't remember her, But Mr. Kang keeps her photograph everywhere, as if memories could resurrect the dead. Mrs. Kim moved to the closet, opening it to reveal rows of identical uniforms. Grey slacks, white polo shirts bearing the Whitmore Academy crest, tiny leather shoes polished to a mirror shine. Jay attends the most elite private school in Manhattan. The other children, their parents are hedge fund managers, tech billionaires, old money families who've owned this city for generations. They teach their children to notice who doesn't belong, to value the wrong things. Jay is sensitive, brilliant, but fragile. The teachers say he doesn't play with the other children, that he spends recess reading alone. "What does he like?" Aisha asked, her nurse's instincts surfacing. "What makes him happy?" Mrs. Kim paused, her expression shifting to something almost tender. Drawing. He draws constantly. Animals, buildings, people he invents. And he likes it when someone reads to him, though his father is rarely home and the previous staff couldn't be bothered. He has nightmares 3 times a week. He asks questions about his mother that no one wants to answer. He's 5 years old and lonelier than anyone should ever be. The tour continued, but Aisha barely registered the remaining rooms. Her mind was stuck on that too large bed, those unopened toys, that photograph of a mother who'd been murdered for loving the wrong man. When they returned to what Mrs. Kim called the receiving room, all dark wood panels and jade accents and furniture that cost more than a car, Aisha understood what she was really being hired for. Not just cleaning, survival duty, keeping a lonely child alive in a fortress built by his father's violence. They waited in silence that stretched until Aisha's legs ached from standing. Mrs. Kim had positioned her precisely in front of a window with her back to the light, deliberately disadvantaging her. A test, maybe, or just habit from a lifetime of serving men who required submission. Then the air changed. Kang Ji-Hoon entered his domain the way apex predators entered anywhere, with the absolute certainty that everything within sight belonged to him. He stood 6'3" with shoulders that filled out his charcoal Tom Ford suit like armor, the fabric so perfectly tailored it seemed grown rather than sewn. His face was all sharp angles and brutal beauty, high cheekbones that could cut glass, a jaw like carved granite, eyes so dark they seemed black until the morning light caught them and revealed depths of brown shot through with amber. A thin scar ran along his left jawline, pale against his skin, the kind of mark that spoke of a knife wielded by someone who'd gotten close enough to try and failed to finish. His dark hair was styled with precision, silver threading through the temples in a way that aged him elegantly rather than diminishing his presence. He moved without sound, despite expensive Italian leather shoes. His hands relaxed at his sides, but positioned in a way that suggested he could draw a weapon in less than a heartbeat. But it was the way space itself seemed to contract around him that froze Aisha's breath, the sense that every molecule of air rearranged itself in deference, that the very room held itself still in his presence. Mrs. Kim bowed deeply from the waist, her voice different now, respectful to the point of submission. "Mr. Kang, this is the applicant. Aisha Washington, 28, pediatric nursing experience, clean background check. Her references are satisfactory." Ji-Hoon's gaze settled on Aisha like a physical weight, and she forced herself not to flinch. He didn't speak immediately, just studied her with an intensity that felt invasive, analytical, as if he could see through her clothes to the bruises Marcus had left on her ribs 3 months ago, through her skin to the secrets she carried, through her secrets to the fear that lived in her bones. "You're Jamaican." It wasn't a question. His English was flawless, each word enunciated with the precision of someone who'd mastered the language as a weapon, only the barest hint of an accent on certain consonants. "You entered the United States 3 years ago, on a K-1 fiancé visa sponsored by Marcus Jennings of Brooklyn, who works at a warehouse in Sunset Park and has a history of domestic violence charges that never quite stuck. Your visa expired 14 months ago when he refused to marry you, after discovering you sent money to your grandmother instead of contributing to his weed fund. You're currently working illegally at the Mandarin Oriental under your cousin Shanice's social security number, scrubbing toilets for $12 an hour. You send $300 a month to Kingston for your grandmother's diabetes medication. And you're running from Marcus, who found you 2 months ago and put his hands around your throat, hard enough to leave bruises you covered with makeup for a week. Aisha's blood turned to ice in her veins. She hadn't mentioned any of that to the agency. Not Marcus, not the expired visa, not the borrowed identity. How did you... I don't hire without knowing everything. He circled her slowly, predatory, examining from angles that made her acutely aware of every flaw. Your nursing certification is legitimate, which means you're educated and competent. You're desperate, which means you're motivated to keep this position. And you're illegal, which means you have powerful incentive to never repeat anything you see or hear within these walls. These are acceptable credentials for someone who will be caring for my son. She should have been terrified. Part of her was, the part that recognized the cold calculation in his eyes, the barely leashed violence in the way he moved, the absolute certainty that he could destroy her life with a single phone call to immigration. But another part, the part that had survived Marcus's fists and the grinding poverty and the soul-crushing humiliation of cleaning up after people who didn't know her name, recognized something almost honest in his brutal pragmatism. "I need this job, Mr. Kang." Her voice came out quieter than she intended, but steady. "I'm good with children. I understand the medical requirements for your son's allergies and asthma. I know how to use natural cleaning products, how to maintain an environment for someone with sensitivities, and I promise I'll never..." "You'll promise nothing." He stepped closer. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and dark, cedar and smoke, and something that made her think of old temples and older violence. His voice dropped to something lower, more dangerous, each word carefully spaced. "You'll simply do what's required, or you'll be gone. My son has been through 4 caregivers in the past 11 months. They leave because they can't handle the isolation, the scrutiny, the reality of who his father is, and what that means. Some leave because they're uncomfortable around a child who doesn't smile easily. Some because they realize that working in this house means witnessing things that could get them killed if they talk. Can you handle those things, Miss Washington?" Aisha thought of the clinic in Kingston, where she'd held babies as they died from dengue fever, because their parents couldn't afford the hospital. She thought of the little girl with sickle cell who'd gripped her hand and asked if heaven hurt less than living. She thought of Marcus's hands around her throat, and the moment she'd understood that running meant possibly dying, but staying meant definitely dying. She thought of her grandmother's last letter, asking in her careful handwriting when Aisha would visit, not understanding there was no money for plane tickets, no home left to return to. "I can handle it," she said, meeting his eyes directly despite every instinct screaming to look away. "I've handled worse, and I don't run when things get difficult." Something flickered in Ji-Hoon's expression, not warmth exactly, but perhaps recognition, the acknowledgement of one survivor seeing another. "Mrs. Kim will show you your quarters. You start tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. Jay wakes at 6:30. His breakfast requirements are detailed in the kitchen logs. Organic oatmeal with specific honey ratios, fresh fruit that's been washed in filtered water, almond milk from a particular brand, because others trigger his eczema. Learn them tonight. Memorize them. He cannot afford mistakes." He turned to leave, his movement as controlled and economical as everything else about him, but paused at the doorway. He didn't look back, but his voice carried clearly across the vast room. "Miss Washington, Jay is everything I have left in this world that's worth protecting. He is the only pure thing in a life built on violence and blood. Understand that, keep him safe, and we won't have problems. Fail him." The unspoken threat hung in the air like smoke. "Fail him, and you'll wish immigration was your biggest worry." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, a father's promise. And somehow, that was more terrifying than anything else. The first morning, Aisha woke at 4:30 a.m. in her small room on the staff floor, a space roughly the size of her grandmother's kitchen in Kingston, but with a window overlooking the city and a bed that didn't sag in the middle. She showered quickly, twisted her natural hair into a neat bun, and put on one of the uniform dresses. By 5:00 a.m., she was in the kitchen studying the detailed logs Mrs. Kim had left. Jay's breakfast routine was documented with medical precision. Organic steel-cut oats cooked in filtered water for exactly 12 minutes, cooled to 165 degrees Fahrenheit, sweetened with precisely 1 teaspoon of raw manuka honey from a specific New Zealand brand. Fresh blueberries washed 3 times in filtered water, organic strawberries with stems removed because the texture bothered him. 8 ounces of Califia Farms unsweetened almond milk, never the other brands, because they contained additives that triggered his eczema. A multivitamin crushed and mixed into applesauce because he couldn't swallow pills. She had the oatmeal cooking and the fruit prepared when she heard small footsteps padding down the hallway at exactly 6:31 a.m. Jae-min appeared in the kitchen doorway like a ghost, small and silent in his grey pajamas. He was tiny for 5, maybe 40 pounds, with delicate features that would be beautiful when he grew into them. His dark hair stuck up in the back where he'd slept on it, his eyes enormous and cautious in a face too solemn for a child. He clutched a worn, stuffed rabbit that looked out of place against the luxury surrounding them, its fur rubbed thin from being held too tightly, too often. "Good morning," Aisha said gently, keeping her voice soft and warm the way she'd learned in pediatric training. She crouched down to his eye level, making herself smaller, less intimidating. "I'm Aisha. I'm going to be helping take care of you. Mrs. Kim told me you like oatmeal with blueberries." Jae stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, barely audible, "You're black." "I am," Aisha said. "Not offended, just honest. I'm from Jamaica. That's an island in the Caribbean. Have you learned about the Caribbean in school?" He shook his head slowly, still gripping his rabbit. "The other kids at school, they say black people are only janitors and criminals. But you're a nurse, Mrs. Kim told me." Aisha's heart clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. "People say lots of things that aren't true. I was a nurse in Jamaica, and now I'm here to make sure you stay healthy and safe. Does that sound okay?" The smallest nod. Then, "Did you make my oatmeal right? The last lady made it wrong, and I couldn't breathe." "I followed the instructions exactly. 165 degrees, manuka honey, blueberries washed 3 times. Would you like to check the temperature with me to be sure?" For the first time, something like interest flickered in Jae's eyes. "I can check. Of course, it's your body. You should know what goes into it." She showed him the food thermometer, let him read the digital display. Explained why temperature mattered for someone with his sensitivities. He ate slowly, carefully, testing each bite as if expecting poison. But he ate everything, and when he was done, he looked at her with something almost like trust. "Thank you," he whispered. It was perfect. Over the next 3 weeks, a routine emerged. Aisha learned that Jae liked his toast cut into precise squares, not triangles, that he needed 15 minutes of quiet time after breakfast before getting dressed because transitions were hard, that he counted things, steps from his room to the elevator, tiles in the bathroom, books on his shelf, as a way to manage anxiety that no 5-year-old should have to carry. She accompanied him to Whitmore Academy, a fortress of privilege on the Upper East Side, where children arrived in town cars and wore uniforms that cost more than Aisha's monthly salary. The other mothers, always mothers, never nannies, because nannies waited outside, looked through her like she was glass. The children were worse, their cruelty learned from parents who'd perfected the art of making people feel small. One Saturday afternoon in Central Park, Jae sat on their usual bench drawing while Aisha watched. He'd been working on the same picture for 20 minutes, a detailed dragon with scales he'd carefully shaded, wings spread wide. Then he picked up a brown crayon and began adding a figure beside the dragon. A woman with dark skin and a bright smile, wearing a simple dress. "That's beautiful," Aisha said. "Who is she?" "You," Jae said simply, then added in his careful printing above her head, "My friend Aisha." Something warm bloomed in Aisha's chest, fragile and precious. "I'm honored to be your friend." That evening, Ji-Hoon returned home early, an unusual occurrence. Aisha was in the kitchen preparing Jae's dinner when she heard his footsteps, that particular cadence that made the air change. He appeared in the doorway still wearing his suit, though his tie was loosened, and there was something dark on his left cuff that looked suspiciously like dried blood. "How is he?" Ji-Hoon asked without preamble. Good. We went to the park. He drew. Aisha kept her voice steady, professional, though her pulse quickened at his proximity. His breathing has been stable all week. No reactions to any foods. He's been sleeping better. Only one nightmare instead of the usual 3. Ji-Hoon's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. You've been counting his nightmares. I'm in the next room. I hear when he cries out. I've been going in, helping him calm down, staying until he falls back asleep. She paused. I hope that's appropriate. Mrs. Kim said the previous staff didn't. It's appropriate. He moved closer, and Aisha became acutely aware of how small the kitchen suddenly felt. What does he dream about? His mother, mostly. Places he's never been but imagines. Sometimes he dreams about being chased, about not being fast enough. Aisha met his eyes. He's carrying trauma he's too young to understand. The isolation, the loss, the weight of who you are, it's too much for a child. She expected anger at her boldness. Instead, Ji-Hoon's jaw tightened and he looked away, staring out the window at the city sprawling below. I know, but keeping him close, keeping him protected, it's the only way I know to keep him alive. The people who killed his mother would use him to destroy me if they could reach him. Then let me help carry some of that weight, Aisha said quietly, not just as staff, as someone who cares about him. Ji-Hoon turned back to her, and for the first time, she saw past the cold exterior to something raw underneath. Grief, fear, the terrible vulnerability of a man who'd built an empire on violence, but couldn't protect the one thing that mattered from the cruelty of the world. He drew you, Ji-Hoon said finally. In his sketchbook. I saw it this morning before he left for school. He's never drawn anyone before except his mother. The moment stretched between them, fragile and significant. Then Jay's voice called from the other room, breaking the spell, and Ji-Hoon stepped back, the walls rebuilding themselves. Continue what you're doing, he said, his tone returning to formal distance. You're good for him. But as he left, Aisha caught something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not just approval, recognition, maybe even gratitude. The following Tuesday, everything changed. Aisha was cleaning the main living area when the elevator doors opened and a woman emerged who made the luxury surrounding them look cheap by comparison. She was tall, perhaps 5'9", with the kind of willowy frame that came from personal trainers and carefully managed eating. Her skin was porcelain pale, her blonde hair styled in loose waves that had definitely cost $400 at a salon in Soho. She wore a cream Chanel suit with the kind of casual elegance that screamed old money, her Louboutin heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. But it was her eyes that made Aisha's stomach clench. Cold. Calculating. The blue of winter ice. Assessing and dismissing Aisha in a single glance. You must be the new help, the woman said, her voice carrying the practiced condescension of someone who'd been looking down on people her entire life. She set her Hermes bag on the Italian leather sofa without asking permission, as if she owned the space. I'm Victoria Ashford, Ji-Hoon's fiancée. He didn't mention hiring new staff. Fiancé. The word hit Aisha like a physical blow, though she had no right to feel anything about it. Miss Washington, I care for Jamin. Ah, yes, the child. Victoria examined her manicure with studied disinterest. Such a sensitive little thing. I've told Ji-Hoon he needs more discipline, less coddling, but he insists on indulging every whim. Her gaze flicked back to Aisha, sharp and assessing. You're Jamaican. Yes, ma'am. How exotic. The word dripped with disdain. I'm sure you're doing your best, but Jay requires someone with proper credentials. Once Ji-Hoon and I are married, we'll be making changes. Private boarding school in Switzerland, perhaps. Somewhere that can provide structure, discipline. The influence of... Her gaze raked over Aisha deliberately. Inappropriate attachments can be so damaging to a child's development. Aisha's hands tightened on the cleaning cloth, her nails digging into her palms. Jay is thriving. His asthma attacks have decreased by 70%. He's sleeping better. He's starting to smile. How sweet that you've been keeping track. Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. But you're the help, darling. You don't make decisions about his care. You follow orders. I trust you understand the distinction? Before Aisha could respond, the elevator opened again, and Ji-Hoon emerged. His expression when he saw Victoria was carefully neutral, revealing nothing. "You're early. I wanted to see the improvements you mentioned." Victoria glided to him, placing a possessive hand on his arm. "Though I must say, Ji-Hoon, hiring illegal immigrants seems rather reckless even for you. What if immigration raids? What if she talks to the wrong people?" Ji-Hoon's gaze shifted to Aisha, and she saw the warning there. "Say nothing. Reveal nothing. Miss Washington's employment is my concern, not yours. Everything about this household is my concern." Victoria's voice hardened. "I'll be mistress here soon enough. The wedding is in 4 months, or have you forgotten?" "I haven't forgotten." But there was something in Ji-Hoon's tone, not warmth, not even interest, obligation, duty, the resignation of a man fulfilling a contract rather than choosing a partner. Over the following weeks, Victoria became a constant presence, arriving unannounced to inspect, criticize, and subtly undermine. She questioned Jay's meal choices, his bedtime routine, the books Aisha read to him. She made comments about proper English when Aisha's accent showed through, about hygiene standards when she saw Aisha preparing food with her bare hands after washing them thoroughly. But the cruelty toward Jay was worse. "Why are you so clingy?" Victoria asked him one afternoon, her voice light but cutting. "Your father is busy building an empire. He doesn't have time to coddle you every moment. You need to learn independence." Jay, who'd been showing her a drawing, pulled back as if slapped. I just wanted to show." "Art is fine as a hobby, but you're a Kang. You'll need real skills. Mathematics, strategy, languages, not crayon scribbles." She handed the drawing back dismissively. "Perhaps when you're older and have something worth sharing." Aisha watched Jay's face crumple, saw him retreat into himself the way he had when she'd first arrived. That night, he had 3 nightmares. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. Aisha was helping Jay with his homework when she heard Victoria's voice from Ji-Hoon's office, the door slightly ajar. She shouldn't have listened, but something in the tone made her pause, made her move closer. "Absolutely perfect timing," Victoria was saying, her voice low and excited. "Uncle Wei confirmed the shipment routes. If we redirect just 30% through the dummy corporations, Ji-Hoon will never notice until it's too late. The black diamond inventory is so vast, a few million in losses will seem like accounting errors. And the casinos," a male voice Aisha didn't recognize, "Chen is ready to move on the Atlantic City operations. Once Ji-Hoon is distracted by the wedding, we execute. By the time he realizes what's happening, we'll have drained enough to cripple his empire. Uncle Wei takes over the Korean operations. We take 40% of the profits." "And Ji-Hoon," Victoria's laugh was cold. "Well, let's just say accidents happen, especially to men who've made as many enemies as he has." Aisha's blood turned to ice. She was listening to a murder plot, a betrayal. Victoria wasn't Ji-Hoon's fiancée. She was a weapon planted by his rivals. She backed away from the door carefully, her heart hammering so hard she was sure they could hear it. She made it to Jay's room and closed the door, her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone. Should she tell Ji-Hoon? Would he believe her? Would he think she was making it up out of jealousy or desperation? But before she could decide, the bedroom door opened. Victoria stood in the doorway, her expression glacial. "Did you enjoy the show, darling?" Aisha's throat went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't insult my intelligence." Victoria stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded like a prison cell locking. "You were listening. I saw your shadow under the door, which means now we have a problem." "I won't say anything." The words came out strangled. "I just want to take care of Jay. I don't care about your business, but you do care about staying in this country, about your grandmother's medical bills, about not ending up in Marcus's apartment again." Victoria's smile was vicious. "Yes, I know all about Marcus, about the restraining order you can't file because you're illegal, about how he's been looking for you. It would be such a shame if someone told him exactly where to find you, or if immigration received an anonymous tip about the Mandarin Oriental's hiring practices." Aisha felt the walls closing in. "What do you want? Your silence? Your complicity? And when the time comes, your testimony that Ji-Hoon was unstable, dangerous, a threat to his own son. That will make the custody transfer so much smoother. Victoria examined her nails, casual as discussing the weather. Play along, and you get to keep your pathetic little life. Fight me, and you'll wish you'd never left Jamaica. She left, her heels clicking against the floor like gunshots. Aisha stood frozen, her mind racing. She'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than she'd understood, and now she had a choice: protect herself or protect the man and child who'd become more important to her than her own safety. The answer, terrifying and certain, was already clear. For 3 days, Aisha carried the weight of Victoria's threat like a stone in her chest. She went through the motions, preparing Jay's meals with trembling hands, reading him bedtime stories with a voice that cracked, smiling when he showed her his drawings, while her heart hammered with terror. Victoria watched her with those ice-blue eyes, a predator savoring the fear of cornered prey, making small comments that twisted the knife deeper. "Such dedication," Victoria murmured one morning as Aisha wiped down the marble counters. "It would be tragic if something happened to disrupt this little domestic fantasy you've built." Ji-Hoon was gone more frequently now, dealing with what he tersely described as business complications in Atlantic City. The casino operations Victoria had mentioned. Aisha watched him leave each morning with her warning trapped behind her teeth, paralyzed by fear of what speaking would cost her. Marcus's face haunted her dreams, his hands around her throat, his voice promising that running only delayed the inevitable. But it was Jay who broke through her paralysis. On the 4th night, he woke screaming from a nightmare so violent that Aisha found him tangled in his sheets, gasping for air, his inhaler clutched uselessly in hands too small to coordinate the mechanism. She administered the medication with practiced efficiency, held him as his breathing slowly steadied, felt his tears soak through her nightshirt. "I dreamed the bad people came back," he whispered against her shoulder. "The ones who hurt my first mum. And they took you away too, and Daddy couldn't stop them." Aisha's heart shattered. "I'm not going anywhere, baby, I promise." "That's what the other ladies said, but they always leave." His voice was so small, so broken. "Everyone leaves except Daddy, and he's always sad and angry and scared, even when he pretends he's not." In that moment, Aisha understood with crystalline clarity that protecting herself meant sacrificing this child, that her silence was complicity, that survival without honor was just a slower kind of death. The next morning, she waited until Jay left for school with his security detail, until Mrs. Kim went to market, until the penthouse was empty, except for the ghosts of all the violence it had witnessed. Then she went to Ji-Hoon's office and knocked. "Enter." He was behind his desk, paperwork spread before him, a glass of whiskey despite the early hour. He looked exhausted in a way that went beyond lack of sleep, the kind of tired that came from fighting battles on every front with no allies, no rest, no end in sight. "Mr. Kang, I need to tell you something." Aisha's voice shook, but she forced herself to continue. "It's about Victoria, about what she's planning." His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Close the door." She did, then stood before his desk like a defendant awaiting judgment. The words came in a rush, the overheard conversation, the names Victoria had mentioned, Uncle Wei and the redirected shipments and the casinos and the plan to drain his empire and kill him and take Jay. She told him about Victoria's threats, about Marcus, about the impossible choice she'd been given. When she finished, the silence was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. "Why are you telling me this now?" Ji-Hoon asked finally, his voice dangerously quiet. "Victoria threatened you 4 days ago. You could have run. You could have stayed silent and saved yourself. Why risk everything?" "Because Jay had a nightmare last night." Aisha met his eyes. "Because he's 5 years old, and he's already lost one mother and he can't lose anyone else. Because staying silent would make me complicit in your murder. And I've done a lot of things to survive, but I won't do that, not to you, not to him." Ji-Hoon stood slowly, moved around the desk with that predatory grace that made the air contract. He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could see the thin scar along his jaw, the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, the the muscle ticking in his clenched jaw. "Victoria's uncle is Wei Chen-Lu," he said, each word precisely controlled. "Head of the Chinese syndicate that's been trying to absorb my operations for 6 years, the same organization that killed my wife because they thought it would make me weak, make me vulnerable to a takeover." His hand came up, and Aisha flinched instinctively, but he only brushed a strand of hair from her face with unexpected gentleness. The engagement was arranged by the Korean Council to create peace between factions. I never wanted her, never touched her beyond what appearances required, but I was willing to go through with it because I thought it would protect Jay from another attack. "She's going to take him," Aisha whispered. "After you're dead, she's planning to claim custody, say you were unstable." "I know." At her shocked expression, he continued, "I've known Victoria was a plant for 3 months. I've been feeding her false information, letting her think she's succeeding. What I didn't know was the timeline, or that they plan to use Jay as leverage." His jaw clenched. "What I didn't know was whether anyone in this house could be trusted, whether money or fear would buy everyone's loyalty to her instead of me. You were testing me." The realization hit like cold water. "I was, and you passed." His hand was still near her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone in a gesture so intimate it stole her breath. "You risked everything, your safety, your freedom, possibly your life, to protect my son, to protect me. Do you understand what that means, Aisha?" The use of her first name, the raw vulnerability in his voice, the way he was looking at her like she was something precious rather than expendable, it all crashed over her like a wave. "I care about him, about both of you, more than I should, more than is smart." "Intelligence has nothing to do with this." Ji-Hoon's other hand came up to frame her face, his touch reverent, devastating. "I've been fighting what I feel for you since the day I came home early and found you reading to Jay, both of you laughing at some ridiculous story, and realized you'd brought light into this mausoleum I've been keeping him in. I told myself it was gratitude, professional appreciation. I told myself a woman like you deserved better than a man like me. But watching you risk everything just to warn me..." His forehead touched hers, his breath warm against her lips. "I'm done lying to myself. Ji-Hoon..." His name on her lips felt like blasphemy and prayer combined. "This is dangerous if Victoria finds out." "Let her find out." His voice dropped to something lethal. "I'm done playing defense. We're going to destroy her, dismantle Wei's organization, and eliminate every threat to my son. But I can't do it alone. I need someone I trust absolutely, someone who loves Jay enough to die for him." His eyes searched hers. "Can you be that person, Aisha, knowing what it will cost? Knowing you'll be choosing this life, this violence, no turning back?" Every rational thought screamed at her to run. But Aisha had been running for 3 years, from Jamaica, from Marcus, from poverty, from her own fear, and she was exhausted from running. "Yes," she whispered, "I'm in, whatever it takes." The kiss was inevitable, desperate, tasting of whiskey and shared terror, and something that might have been hope, if hope didn't feel so much like a weapon. When they finally broke apart, Ji-Hoon's expression had transformed into something cold and calculating. "Victoria's meeting with Wei tomorrow night at a warehouse in Red Hook. She thinks I don't know. We're going to let the meeting happen, but we'll have surveillance. Audio, video, everything we need to prove the conspiracy. Then we move on Wei's operations simultaneously, cut off his supply lines, freeze his accounts. By the time Victoria realizes what's happening, she'll have nothing left to bargain with." "What do you need me to do?" Aisha asked. "Victoria trusts you're terrified into compliance. Use that. Get her talking, extract details about the timeline, the other conspirators. She's arrogant. She'll gloat if she thinks she's won." He pulled a small device from his desk drawer. "Recording pen. Clip it to your uniform. Get me names, dates, evidence. And if she suspects, then you run. Straight to my head of security, Minjun. He knows to protect you at all costs." Ji-Hoon's hand cupped her face again. "I won't let her hurt you. I won't let anyone hurt you ever again. That's a promise." Over the next 36 hours, Aisha became a spy in her own workplace. She played the frightened victim perfectly, letting her real fear show through while carefully steering conversations with Victoria toward details. The other woman, sensing victory, couldn't resist elaborating. Wei has contacts in the NYPD, Victoria mentioned casually over wine she'd demanded Aisha serve. The investigation into Ji-Hoon's death will be perfunctory at best. Rival gang violence, they'll conclude. So tragic. She examined her manicure. I'll play the grieving widow beautifully. The tabloids will eat it up. What about Jay? Aisha forced the words past the rage building in her chest. Boarding school in Switzerland within a month. I'll visit twice a year. Enough to maintain appearances. By the time he's 18, he'll be so disconnected from his father's legacy that he won't even think to fight for it. Victoria smiled. It's almost kind, really. Sparing him from following in his father's footsteps. The recording pen captured every word, every damning detail. The night of the warehouse meeting, Aisha stayed with Jay while Ji-Hoon and his security team moved into position. She'd insisted on this. If something went wrong, Jay needed someone there who'd die before letting anyone take him. They read stories until he fell asleep, his small hand clutching hers, his breathing even and peaceful, unaware that his entire future hung in the balance. At 11:47 p.m., her phone buzzed. A text from Ji-Hoon. We have everything. Moving now. At 12:15 a.m., Victoria's screams echoed through the penthouse as FBI agents emerged from the elevator. Aisha watched from Jay's doorway as the woman who'd threatened to destroy them was led away in handcuffs. Her perfect composure shattered, her voice shrill with desperate denials. This is a setup. Ji-Hoon orchestrated this. He's the criminal, not me. But the lead agent was unmoved. We have recordings of you conspiring to commit fraud, racketeering and murder. We have financial records showing your embezzlement of over $18 million from Kang's legitimate business operations. And we have testimony from 6 witnesses placing you at the scene of multiple criminal conspiracies. Victoria Ashford, you're under arrest. As they dragged her toward the elevator, Victoria's eyes found Aisha's. The hatred there was pure and incandescent. You stupid bitch. You think he'll keep you? You're just the help. Just a warm body until someone better comes along. You'll end up exactly where you started. Alone, illegal, worthless. Ji-Hoon appeared beside Aisha, his presence solid and grounding. She's not the help, he said, his voice carrying clearly. She's the woman who saved my son's life and my empire. She's worth 100 of you. And she'll never be alone again. The elevator doors closed on Victoria's furious shriek. In the sudden silence, Aisha's legs gave out. Ji-Hoon caught her, held her as she shook with relief and terror and the adrenaline crash of surviving something that should have killed her. It's over, he murmured against her hair. Wei's organization is being raided simultaneously. The FBI has been building a case for months. I just gave them the final piece they needed. Victoria, Wei, all his lieutenants, they're done. What about immigration? Aisha whispered. She threatened. Already handled. My lawyers are filing for a U visa. Victim of crime, cooperating witness. You'll have legal status by the end of the month. He pulled back to look at her. And I'm handling Marcus personally. He won't bother you again, I promise you that. She didn't ask what handling Marcus meant. She didn't want to know. The morning after Victoria's arrest, Jay woke to find his father sitting on the edge of his bed, something that almost never happened. Ji-Hoon looked different somehow, lighter, as if a weight he'd carried for years had finally been lifted. Is the bad lady gone? Jay asked, his voice small but hopeful. She's gone, son. She can't hurt us anymore. Ji-Hoon brushed hair from Jay's forehead with unexpected tenderness, and she's never coming back. Because of Aisha. The question was astute beyond his years. She protected us, didn't she? She did. She was very brave. Jay was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, can she stay forever, please? I don't want her to leave like the others. Ji-Hoon's expression softened in a way Aisha had never seen, watching from the doorway. She's not going anywhere. I promise you that. The FBI investigation dominated the news for weeks. Federal agents dismantled Wei Chen-Lu's empire with surgical precision, warehouses raided in 5 cities, accounts frozen totaling over $200 million, 63 arrests including corrupt NYPD officers and customs officials. Victoria's testimony, given in exchange for a reduced sentence of 20 years instead of life, implicated politicians, judges, and business leaders who'd thought themselves untouchable. The tabloids had a field day. "Mafia fiancé's betrayal exposed," screamed the Post. "Black Diamond Queen falls," announced the Times with more restraint. Victoria's carefully constructed image, the socialite philanthropist, the elegant heiress, shattered under the weight of evidence showing her true nature. Photographs of her being led away in handcuffs, her designer suit rumpled, her makeup streaked with tears became iconic symbols of hubris punished. Ji-Hoon's legitimate business operations, which had always existed alongside his darker enterprises, were scrutinized but ultimately cleared. His lawyers were exceptional, his records impeccable enough to withstand investigation. The Black Diamond trade was restructured, made more legitimate or at least more carefully hidden. Some operations were quietly shuttered, others transferred to trusted associates. "I'm tired of looking over my shoulder," he told Aisha one night as they stood in his office, the city glittering below them like a sea of captured stars. "Tired of worrying that every business deal might get Jay killed. I built this empire to have power, to protect what's mine. But what's the point of power if I'm too paranoid to use it for anything but survival?" "What are you saying?" Aisha asked. "I'm saying I want to be the father Jay deserves, the man you deserve." He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her waist. "I'm saying I'm liquidating the criminal operations over the next 2 years, transitioning everything to legitimate business. Real estate, tech investments, the casino operations in Atlantic City restructured legally. It won't be clean. Nothing I touch is ever completely clean, but it will be safer. That's a dangerous transition. The other families won't like losing territory. Let them not like it. Way's fall created a power vacuum. I'm filling it with allies who think like I do, tired of the violence, ready to age out of the street wars and into something sustainable." His hand came up to cup her face. "I almost lost everything because I was too busy playing mob boss to notice the enemy in my own house. I won't make that mistake again." 3 months after Victoria's arrest, on a crisp Saturday morning, Ji-Hoon gathered his household in the main living room. Mrs. Kim, Min-jun and the security team, the kitchen staff, everyone who'd served loyally through the chaos, and Aisha, standing slightly apart because she still wasn't sure where she fit in this new order. "I'm making some changes," Ji-Hoon announced. "Mrs. Kim, you're retiring effective immediately with a full pension and a residence in the building for as long as you want it. You've earned rest." Mrs. Kim's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Kang, no arguments. You've given me 17 years. It's enough." He turned to the others. "Bonuses will be distributed today. Significant bonuses because your discretion and loyalty during a difficult time will not be forgotten. Those who wish to stay under the new household management are welcome. Those who want to move on will receive excellent references." Then he looked at Aisha, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "Miss Washington has been offered a position managing my household and serving as Jay's primary caregiver, with full benefits, legal immigration sponsorship, and a salary commensurate with her education and value." His voice softened. "She's also been offered something else, something personal that's none of your business, but that I'm telling you anyway, because this house deserves honesty." He crossed to her, took her hand in full view of everyone. "Aisha has been offered the position of my partner, not employee, not staff, my equal in this house and in my life. Anyone who has a problem with that can collect their severance and leave now." No one moved. Mrs. Kim was crying openly now, smiling through her tears. Min-jun nodded with clear approval. The rest of the staff looked shocked but not opposed. "Well then," Ji-Hoon said, "I believe we have work to do." That evening, after Jay was asleep, Ji-Hoon led Aisha to the rooftop garden she hadn't known existed, a hidden sanctuary with flowering trees and a koi pond, and a view of Manhattan that made her feel like they were floating above the world. The night air was cool, the city humming with distant life, and everything felt impossibly fragile and precious. "I had my lawyers draw up papers," Ji-Hoon said, pulling a folder from inside his jacket. "Your U visa was approved. You're legal. You're safe. And Marcus signed an agreement this morning. He'll serve 6 months for the assault charges I had filed, and in exchange for not pursuing further prosecution, He's agreed to a permanent restraining order and relocation to California. He won't bother you again. Aisha's hands trembled as she took the papers, seeing the official stamps, the signatures that meant freedom. How did you... I have resources, and I'll use every single one of them to protect you. He stepped closer. I also had them draw up guardianship papers for Jay, naming you as co-guardian with full parental rights. If something happens to me, he's yours. Legally, officially, permanently. No one can take him from you. The tears came before she could stop them. Ji-Hoon, I don't know what to say. Say you'll stay. Say you'll build a life here with us. Say you'll let me love you the way I've wanted to since the day you risked everything to save my son. His hands framed her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. I know I'm asking you to choose a complicated life. I know my past will always cast shadows, but I swear to you, Aisha, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing us. I chose you the moment I walked into your office to warn you about Victoria, she whispered. I chose Jay the first time he smiled at me. This was never really a choice, Ji-Hoon. It was inevitable. The kiss was different from their first, not desperate or stolen, but certain. A promise, a beginning. 6 months later, Aisha stood in Jay's bedroom watching him draw at his desk, his small face scrunched in concentration. He was working on something special, he'd said, something important for school. When he finally turned it around to show her, her breath caught. It was a family portrait. 3 figures, a tall man with dark hair and a gentle smile, a woman with dark skin and bright eyes, and a small boy between them holding both their hands. Above them, in his careful printing, he'd written, "My family." At the top of the page, in the spot where he used to draw his mother alone, he'd added something new. A woman with long dark hair watching over them from the clouds, smiling down with approval. Is this okay? Jay asked anxiously. I put first Mom in heaven watching, and I put you and Daddy here with me, because you're my family now, both of you. Aisha knelt beside him, pulling him into a hug that conveyed everything words couldn't. It's perfect, baby. It's absolutely perfect. That night she showed the drawing to Ji-Hoon. He stared at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he carefully placed it in a frame and hung it in his office, right beside the photograph of Min-seo, not replacing her but adding to the story. Past and present, grief and hope, loss and love found in unexpected places. She would have liked you, he said quietly, his arm around Aisha's waist as they looked at both images. Min-seo always said Jay needed someone strong, someone who wouldn't break under the weight of loving a Kang. She would have been grateful that he found you. We found each other, Aisha corrected. All 3 of us. Outside, Manhattan glittered in the darkness, millions of lives intersecting in ways they'd never understand. Somewhere in that vast city, Victoria sat in a federal prison contemplating 20 years of consequences. Wei Chen-Lu faced trial for crimes that would keep him locked away for life. Marcus was rebuilding a different existence on the opposite coast, paid handsomely to forget that Aisha Washington had ever existed. But in the Dragon Tower, in the fortress that had once felt like a mausoleum, a small family had been forged from survival and sacrifice, and the stubborn refusal to let fear win. A child slept peacefully for the first time in his young life, secure in the knowledge that he was loved, protected, wanted. A man who'd built an empire on violence was learning to build a life on trust. And a woman who'd crossed an ocean searching for survival had found something infinitely more valuable. She'd found home,